What are your favorite themes in your
Oh, hunger for freedom wherever it goes, which explains Second Home and a few other songs. The ethics I hold, the things I worship are life, freedom, intelligence, and art, in that order.
How and when did Leslie get involved with art, both in general and specifically with fandom?
Well, I could draw from the time I was little, and I could draw pretty well. My mom gave me some crayons, and there's no holding me back. At first, I drew horses everywhere. Yeah, in the workbooks, my school books on the wall. Horses, I could draw pretty well, and my parents expected that if I wasn't going to be a lyric soprano and sing in the Met, I could do worse than be an artist. And it was purely on my drawing. I got into painting and sculpture when I was in college. Well, actually, I started in grade school, worked at it for a bit while I was in college, but it soon became obvious that, well, look, you know what it's like to be settled and to be driven by a muse which insists you will do this art. Well, think what fun it is to be settled and written by three of them: art, fiction, music. Yeah. But there's only so many hours in a day, only so much strength in a human body. There's something had to go to the wall. Well, I had to concentrate on one or the other. And so it was music first, fiction second, art third. And besides, I wasn't as good at painting as I was at singing. So, simple decision.
Never occurred to you that you could marry a couple of those and do comic books?
I thought about it, but I couldn't get into the publishing business because it was more of a business that I was not in a position to get into. I'd be too busy with that, I couldn't do my singing. And the singing was taking precedence.
Right. All right. There's two questions here that are so close to each other that I'm just going to read them all. I am familiar with Leslie's non-track writing. How and when did Leslie get involved with writing fan fiction? What was the first fan fiction that she wrote?
Let's see, I got into fanfic through Star Trek. I discovered Trek magazines and then Trek fic. And, I think the first one I ever wrote was a short little piece of fluff about Captain Kirk getting grabbed by a carnivorous plant and having Spock having to help him out of it. It was a comedy piece. Kirk getting stuck in this sticky plant, and Spock having to pull him out, and Kirk asking just, "Don't tell Sulu." And there were some other short, let's say, fluff pieces like that. And then the great KS argument started. Kirk/Spock. Kirk/Spock. Are they or aren't they? And I looked at the whole Trek, classic Trek, and said, yeah, okay. These guys love each other. And being a female, we realize that when people say love, they can also mean sex. And how intense does a feeling have to get before it has to be expressed physically? If we're tickled, we laugh. If we're hurt, we cry. If we're angry, we shout. But you have to do something physical with an intense feeling. A few people had started writing Kirk Spock stories. I think the first was a thing called A Fragment Out of Time by Diane Marchant, an Australian. It's very impressionistic. A love scene from Spock's point of view, where he's carefully not describing anything, just reveling in feeling for the first time in his life. And it was very effective. After that came, Alternative by Jerry Downs, which was a case of, okay, Spock is going to come into heat again sometime, and his bondmate has abandoned him. He's got to have somebody else. What happened if he's alone there, and who's handy? Now, Jerry Downs wrote a really thoughtful story about what would happen in that situation. Yeah, Kirk would save his buddy's life no matter what. Okay, she had them stuck in this situation. It's mostly seen from Kirk's point of view. Is Spock in danger of dying? And I start to think, God, is there any female anything on this planet? Any female? And then he takes one thought over and says, why does it have to be a female at all? And as she says, one part of his mind seriously considered the question while the other part ran away at top speed. He thinks it over and he goes in there and managed to persuade Spock to agree. And that takes work. And so those are the first two KS stories were republished. And My Shelter was the third. It's a story in which, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are running from a shuttle crash. The engine's going to blow. They have to get to shelter to get into a cave. They find it. Spock has been hurt during the crash. He's unconscious, or semi-conscious. They get into the cave just in time. The shuttle blows, brings down the entrance, and they're stuck inside. The ship is going to come back in a few hours, and their communicators work no problem. There's plenty of air. They're safe. Problem is, Spock is in a bad way. He's delirious from the hit wound. And, well, they're on either side of him. They hold him down, and Spock recognizes that he doesn't seem to realize Bones is there at all, but he recognizes Kirk. And he confesses his feelings for him. And the more he tells about his feelings, the more obviously aroused he gets, because the emotion is taking him over. And McCoy's only hearing fragments of this. He's hearing this, but only seeing fragments. And it's all done from McCoy's point of view. Basically, what they physically do is Spock climbs onto Kirk, and they just dry hump. That's all it is. But it's the feelings that count. And McCoy then has to pretend that he fell asleep and didn't hear the whole thing. And then, of course, once I wrote this story, fans promptly wrote back saying, "What happened when they woke up?" So I had to write the sequel, which is Poses, about the two of them dealing with the poses they've lived with. Spock with his, I'm Vulcan, I feel nothing. And Kirk with his, I am the captain. Then, of course, people wanted to ask, could there be any other possible way to get them together? And so that's when I wrote This Deadly Innocence, or The End of the Hurt Comfort Syndrome, because it was becoming pretty obvious by then that the hurt comfort syndrome was a tropic euphemism or allegory for sex. And so I wrote this story about, they both got into an emotional transactional game. McCoy catches them at it and makes them take shore leave on a harmless planet and orders them to work out their hang-ups because they can't keep going on like this. So the story is the whole exploration of how they try to deal with their problem of love that dare not speak its name, and how the hell do we talk to each other?
Does Leslie have any unfinished fan fiction lying around? If so, will it ever be finished?
Well, after I finished The Wait, which was an enormous episodic novel, I was going to make part 2. Never got around to it. I got a story plotted, at least. What I was going to have is that, at the end of The Wait, Quanachoda and the crew take off in this altered ship, and Ronatree is left behind to deal with being abandoned and betrayed. So what I was going to do is have part 2 have 2 parallel stream stories, that where Quanachoda has got the ship with a computer that has the entire log of the Enterprise. So she takes the crew and the stolen ship to Flint's world. Remember Flint, the immortal? Okay, now it occurred to me that he was not, in the years since we've realized he's not the only immortal around. There are Highlanders. Yeah, cross it with the Highlander universe. Okay. What happens is Quanachoda takes the ship to Flint's world. I was going to open that story with the only man on the planet sat alone in his front room. There was a knock on the door. But he knows who it is because they've contacted him by radio. And he's curious about them. Okay, this is assuming this is not too long after Kirk visited Flint's world for the first time. He hasn't been away from. Right. Okay. The Wait takes place during the 6th and 7th year. So it's only a couple of years after the episode with Flint in it. He hasn't left yet to go to Earth. But anyway, Quanachoda comes in effect knocking on his doors and tells him flat out, "We are refugees of the universe. I have an interesting story to tell." And he's interested, so he lets her come in. He recognizes her similarity to Spock, and the fact that she's wearing what seems to be a Starfleet uniform. And he says, "What's your relationship to Starfleet?" And she says, "Refugee." And he invites her to dinner. He has this little robot servant. When he isn't trying to make robot women, he's got good little robot servants. Invites her to dinner and has her tell her story, and she does a Scheherazade on him. What she does is she keeps him interested enough that he agrees to take in her crew. And finally, after hearing enough of her story to be really fascinated and realize he's falling for her, he gets on the interspace radio and calls up an old friend, McLeod. Tick, tick. "Hello, Mac." Mac, it's Flint again. Flint, when are you coming home? Not for a couple of years yet. I've got another project in mind. Come on, you're mortal now. You're aging. If you don't come back, you'll continue to age. He says, another 2 or 3 years won't make a difference. Won't make that much of a difference, and I have a plan in mind. So basically, he takes in Quanachota, her crew, and all the seed and DNA samples she's got on the board. And they start terraforming that world. He also sends word out to his friends in the immortal community. Okay, and another thing he finds out is Quanachota's fertility problem. He's enough of a good biologist, he can figure a solution. And he's falling for her. So he says in any case, marry me. She agrees. So she marries Flint. And he does manage to give her a healthy child. And meanwhile, Rowntree is having her own adventures. She goes to a lot of the places that she goes back over a lot of the ground that Kirk covered. Only she comes to different solutions. And like with the various arrogant energy beings she calls them assholes, makes them realize what they've lost by losing flesh. And when it comes to Klingons, she gets them in. She talks her way out of being captured by describing how to make a large microwave oven. And gets them intrigued with anything that goes in there. If you turn it on and stays too long, it goes. If you take a whole body and put it in there, and you turn this on, it goes bang, boom, splat all over the walls. And the Klingons become fascinated with the bang, boom room until the Klingon outpost is down to half its personnel. When the local commander comes by, is appalled and says, "Get rid of that woman." I says, "Fine, you back my ship, I'll go. Get out of here, get out of here." So that's how she deals with the Klingons. Something similar to the Romulans. But I say in effect, she goes through the series backwards, dealing with everything Kirk dealt with. Of course, some things she can't because they're gone, like the planet killer robot and the giant amoeba. I mean, now that she has Kirk's knowledge, she can use that for different ways. But also, she starts having an affair with Spock. Yep. So he's got this bonding problem, remember? And neither he nor Kirk dares to admit that Kirk tricked Janet's people and all that and restored the universe, not just to restore the universe he knew, but because he wanted Spock back. Like in that confrontational scene in the bridge, where he's trying to explain to Spock about, nobody knows how it was. I was alone and you were dead. And he stops there and Spock says, "I know, I always knew." And then Kirk thinks to himself, no, it had to be for more than that. That's what that's about. But he owes Janet big time. First thing that happens is as soon as she fights her way out, she's in sickbay when we last see her, but as soon as she fights her way out from under the anesthetic, she managed to get her shotgun back, tries to kill him and misses. And so the two of them wind up in the same bed. And he says, "What are you going to do now?" And she thinks and said, "Well, the only thing left is to go ahead with that little plot that Uhura had for me and join Starfleet." What she really has in mind is searching for Flint's world to catch up to her crew again. So anyway, after a long series of weird adventures, I forget how I solved this, but she loses both Kirk and Spock and says the hell with it. And she resigns forcefully from Starfleet, taking her ship with her. In other words, mutinies. But she has a rough idea now where to go. So she does some marvelous maneuvers through an asteroid belt that discourage pursuit. And gets to Flint's world, meets Quanachota again, and meets Flint. And remember, her people are used to her marrying triple. So she marries him too. He's also worked as a lawyer many times. He knows his space law. So he eventually goes back to Earth and dives into complete anonymity, except that he's got the contacts with all the immortals. And he's set up his world so that his two wives inherit the ownership of the planet.
Okay.
And as basically a privately owned world, it's not under it's not a part of the Federation. It's within the Federation, buried deep enough in that anybody who wants to come attack them has got to go through the Federation to get to them. But they're not officially a Federation world, so they don't have a government except their own. And what they put together is, a functioning anarchy, where they had the great public assembly that decides everything. And, the elders, that's the people who are in the first ship, which eventually come down to Quantashoda and Jeneth, and a few of the older ones. They become elder statesmen, senior advisors. The rebels from all over the galaxy show up there and join them. I mean, if you're an anarchist, here's where to go. And they put together a functioning world, and they've got this terraforming project. So they've got life forms from all over the galaxy parked, ecosystems from all over the galaxy parked on different islands in this big archipelago. And they raise food and livestock for every world in known space. And they've also invented a tight little kind of armed merchantman ship that can be used as a mining ship, an armed merchantman, or a settler's ship. So they sell these settler kits out of their ships to anybody who's interested. And then finally, years later, Spock, who when we last saw him was working as a spy in the Romulan Empire, remember? He comes to visit. Oh, and is Ms. Jeneth still available? Oh, yeah, the elder statesman, yep. Please tell an old friend wants to see her, a certain Steven, a dealer in Keepus and Trillium. Sure. She says, okay, send him in. And she has a last talk with Spock, and it's very interesting. And she explains that, well, in one sense, we got everything that we wanted that day years ago when we set off from Earth in the old Sunfire. We've got a world of our own that's free and has science. Our dead are indeed alive again, even though they don't know us. And we've got volunteers from all over the galaxy. So in one sense, we got what we wanted. Although I grieve for the ones we lost. Sheen and Spock, it turns out he wants a couple of those settler kits and ships, because what he's been doing back in the Romulan Empire is talking to Romulans who are not part of the aristocracy, and people who do the things like the farming in the factories. And he wants them to get a couple of worlds of their own to settle. So he wants settler kits for the Romulan resistance. And they make their own deal, and oh yeah, it turns out the planet is partly protected by a really brilliant AI that Flint created. He calls it Reynard, after. But you come near Flint's world, and you get a message saying, what ship, you are approaching, you're approaching a private planet. State your intentions. And what you see is on the screen, it looks like a person, but it's an AI. And this is also their law library. And you say what you want, and Reynard, the secretary, will direct you where to land, who to talk to, a whole list of people. You want to buy a ship, go contact these people. You want a settler's kit, go here. You want to go to the university, talk to this one. And the fun part is that this looks like he's not the authority. He's the signs of where you want to go and who you want to talk to. He's the communication system of the planet. And he's what most outsiders deal with. So they never realized this planet does not have a real government. It's not really part of the Federation. One of the best kept secrets in the Federation. So at the end of it, they'd had their interview, and Spock leaves. As he's walking down the corridor, he asked about their children, and it turns out that, Quantashoda had 2 kids, a boy and a girl, and they're working at the university studying the immortality gene, studying the immortality problem, see how that can be applied to mortals. And her 2 kids, one of them, a girl, is working in the Great Northern Archipelago, which is huge, covers half the planet, where they have all these different ecosystems. She's working on developing new ecosystems and new livestock and so on. And, whole ecosystems that could be transplanted to barren worlds. And the boy is named Jim, and he's working with the Home Guard, which is the fleet of local ships that zip back and forth between planets in the solar system, and incidentally are the Home Guard. These are toughly armed merchantmen. And anyway, as Spock is leaving, starts in the corridor, and he sees Jim Kirk, a much younger Jim Kirk, walking toward him, carrying a covered tray, not recognizing. And he steps back and stares until the young man goes and knocks on the door that he just walked out of. And a muffled voice from inside goes, meh. And he says, Mom, lunch. And he realizes this is Jenna's son. Since she is genetically, except for the chromosome, she is genetically Jim Kirk. Of course, her son looks like her. Looks like Jim Kirk. And he takes the tray in, and the door closes behind him, and Spock moves on down the corridor, quietly thanking the pagan gods of the anarchists that he got one more look at that beloved face. And that's the end. And all I have to do is write it. I just got notes here and there. And that's what I've got. The Wait Part 2 is Roundtree's Progress, which is also Conan Childers' Progress.
Do you want to give us the final thought?
Yeah. The general advice of follow your bliss, follow what you love. But that won't make much of a living, so also follow what you're good at. The trick is to live your life unifying what you're good at and what you love. And, of course, that means you have to find out these things fairly early. You have to know what you're good at. So test yourself thoroughly, everything you can think of. That's one thing that higher education is good for, but I'd recommend when you get out of high school, don't go to college, at least not to a university. Go to a trade school and pick up a trade in something that you're good at and you like. Get yourself a skilled trade that you can live on while you're deciding what you want to be. Because you go to trade school, you can walk right out of school into a job that pays well. Then you can sit back and think of what else you want to learn. Then you can save up your money and spend a season in community college. Or take your basic courses at community college, your requirements, and then go to university. But you'll be a lot better equipped to deal with it if you have a trade first. So that's what I would say. Hi, you guys. Wish I could meet you face to face. Thanks for the questions. Hope you enjoyed the answers.